When Georgie and Mandy's first marriage stepped into the spotlight, it didn't just expand a side story from Young Sheldon, it quietly redefined the emotional core of the entire franchise. For years, the heart of Young Sheldon revolved around Sheldon's genius clashing with the world around him. The comedy came from intellectual arrogance meeting small-town Texas practicality. But Georgie and Mandy's marriage shifted that center of gravity. Instead of laughter built on Sheldon's detachment, we got humor rooted in responsibility, vulnerability, and imperfect adulthood. What made Young Sheldon work was its balance. Sheldon's hyperlogical worldview was offset by Mary's faith, George Sr.'s blunt realism, and Missy's grounded perspective. But Sheldon was still the axis. The show's comedic rhythm relied on his inability to read emotional nuance. When Georgie and Mandy became a focal point, the humor changed. It became less about social awkwardness and more about real-life pressure. Georgie, who once functioned as comic relief, the underachieving older brother with big dreams and questionable plans, evolved into something far more layered. His early portrayal leaned into charm and hustle. But marriage and fatherhood forced him into emotional spaces Young Sheldon rarely explored deeply. Watching him navigate work, pride, insecurity, and partnership gave the franchise a different kind of comedic tension. The jokes weren't just punchlines anymore, they were survival mechanisms. Mandy's presence amplified that shift. She wasn't a quirky background character orbiting Sheldon's brilliance. She was grounded, practical, and emotionally articulate. That dynamic created a more adult form of comedy. Arguments weren't exaggerated for slapstick, they were uncomfortable in a recognizable way. Miscommunication didn't feel like a sitcom misunderstanding designed to reset in 22 minutes. It felt like two people genuinely trying and sometimes failing to meet in the middle. And that's where the redefinition really happened. Young Sheldon's comedic heart originally thrived on intellectual contrast. Georgie and Mandy's story introduced emotional contrast. Their scenes carried stakes that weren't about grades or academic rivalry. They were about rent, diapers, pride, exhaustion, and identity. That shift grounded the humor in lived experience. It also reframed Georgie himself. In The Big Bang Theory, adult Georgie was often referenced through Sheldon's biased lens, portrayed as less intelligent, more impulsive, and emotionally reactive. But seeing his younger self step into marriage challenged that narrative. The comedy around him wasn't about incompetence. It was about someone trying to grow faster than he was ready for. That distinction matters. It transforms him from a caricature into a fully realized emotional anchor. Another major shift was tonal maturity. Young Sheldon had always balanced heartfelt moments with lightness, but Georgie and Mandy's arc introduced a subtle melancholy beneath the jokes. We know from established canon that their marriage doesn't last. That knowledge adds weight to even their happiest moments. It creates a layered humor, where we laugh at their bickering while recognizing the fragility underneath. The franchise's comedic DNA didn't disappear, it evolved. The quick dialogue and situational irony remained. But the emotional core deepened. Georgie's stubborn optimism clashing with Mandy's realism became a new engine for comedy. Their disagreements weren't built around absurdity, they were built around values. Career ambition versus emotional availability. Pride versus vulnerability. Independence versus partnership. What's striking is how this shift didn't erase Sheldon's influence, it contextualized it. By giving Georgie and Mandy narrative space, the show highlighted how different siblings respond to the same upbringing. Sheldon intellectualizes everything. Georgie internalizes and reacts. The comedy in their contrast used to feel hierarchical, Sheldon above, Georgie below. Now it feels lateral. Two different coping mechanisms, equally flawed and equally human. The marriage storyline also allowed supporting characters to interact in new ways. Mary's protective instincts played differently when focused on a pregnant daughter-in-law instead of a gifted son. George Sr.'s advice carried more weight when it involved actual marital strain rather than teenage rebellion. The family dynamic expanded beyond orbiting Sheldon's academic milestones. Ultimately, Georgie and Mandy's marriage redefined the franchise's comedic heart by shifting it from precocious genius to messy adulthood. It proved that humor doesn't have to rely on social cluelessness to land. It can come from two people loving each other imperfectly while juggling responsibilities bigger than themselves. And maybe that's the most meaningful evolution. Young Sheldon taught us how a child genius navigates a world that doesn't think like he does. Georgie and Mandy showed us how ordinary people navigate a world that doesn't pause for their growth. One version makes you laugh at absurdity. The other makes you laugh in recognition. That recognition of struggle, pride, love, and missteps is what gives the story its renewed heartbeat.